This is Straight to the Point. I'm your host, Sharon Tonge, and this is my guest, Mr. McIntosh, a librarian at Wiley Secondary School. Hi, Mr. McIntosh.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
What would you consider yourself as, pride in yourself?
I'd like to thank you for having me on today. Pride is essential, especially for people of color. Pride is the basic building block of self-esteem. If one doesn't have self-esteem, one cannot love oneself. I love myself. When I see you, I see myself. When I see you, I think of the struggles that we have had as a people. I think of our individual and collective struggles. I think of our ancestors, those people whose names we will never, ever hear of, whose faces we will never see, those brothers and sisters who were brought to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade. I think of people such as W.B. Du Bois, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey. The names are endless. And when I think of the contribution that those people, my brothers and sisters, have made so that you and I could be here, I have to be proud. When I think of the struggles of my parents, your parents, I have to be proud. Because we as a people have contributed so much to the language of human experience. In response to that question, my sister, I think of those things and many, many other things. Unfortunately, time doesn't permit us to talk about those. But when I think of pride, I think of the joy and the beauty and the strength of my ancestors, and indeed, of those things that I see in you, because you are my future. I feel proud.
Thank you. That's an interesting answer. I like that. Is African American a positive or negative name for you?
The name or the designation as an African American is, it's one of pride for me. I'm proud of that designation because it defines me genetically as well as spiritually. In having a knowledge of myself, I know that the origin of man was on the continent of Africa, 3,000 years ago. 3000 BC, for example, Lucy was a skeleton that was found, or the remains of our ancestors were found on the continent of Africa. So I know that we are the mothers and fathers of civilization. And I don't say that to be boastful or to put anybody down. I say that as a matter of fact. And when we were created by design. It was a grand design. Having a knowledge of that, having a knowledge that we are the origins of mankind, and mankind having originated in Africa, I consider it an appropriate designation to define who I am.
Yes. So, why are you so down to earth about your brothers and sisters in the African American community?
To hear you say that makes me feel good, because I'd like to think that when I see you, there aren't any barriers. When I see you, I'd like to think that you know that I love you. That I love you because, as I said before, you are me. I am you. If I don't have a future, or the only way I should say that I can have a future is to be close to you, to be connected to you. Malcolm X once said that a man without a knowledge of himself is like a tree without roots. He can't grow. So in being down to earth, as you chose to say that, I don't think there's any way that I can honestly be if I am truly about the business of embracing myself and loving myself and affirming life and affirming who I am.
Okay, so when did you become a librarian,
Okay.
and why? When did you decide to become a librarian?
I was born in Augusta, Georgia. And I have very vivid memories of not being able to go to school with white people. In fact, the schools were not integrated until after the riots of 1970, and I was still in elementary school. But I remember the struggle that my father had in just trying to get me through school. I was the first one in my family to go to college. In Augusta, Georgia, on Gwinnett Street was a huge, beautiful marble edifice that's called the Augusta Library. I'd walk by, but I could never do anything other than press my nose against the plate glass window and see people other than myself browsing amongst the books, the periodicals, and being aware of that and remembering that and seeing how it figures in our history and remembering that there was a time when people of color could be killed and whipped and maimed just for wanting to read. It let me know that I had an obligation to myself and to my people to find out and embrace who I am and who I was and who I will be, and all that glory and all of that pain. I learned early on that one of the most effective ways to do that was to read. And so I developed an interest in reading. And at that time, we didn't have the technology of computers. At least we didn't have access to them where I was from. But there was always a book. One of the first books that I read was a book by Chester Himes called The Third Generation. And I remember coming across a poem, maybe I'll share a little bit of it with you. It was a poem, one of the first poems that I learned was a poem by Langston Hughes. It was a very short poem. And he said, "My old mule, he's got a grin on his face. He's been a mule so long, he's forgot about his race. I'm like that old mule, black and don't give a damn. You got to take me just as I am." I read that poem and I thought about it and I tried to figure out what it meant. And it spoke to me in a very profound way. Langston used the mule as a metaphor to say, I'm a black man, I'm a black person. And that's the way that God made me. And that's a glorious, glorious act of creation. In reading those kinds of things in books, I realized that I had a love affair with books, and I began to collect them. People would throw them out, I would take them home, read them. And I decided that one of the places where I could be surrounded by books would be a library. So after finishing undergraduate school, I went on to get a master's degree, and when I came to New York, I was at a poetry reading, and there was a librarian who stayed behind to tell me that she liked the poem that I wrote, and said to me, if there's anything that I can ever do for you, let me know. Subsequently, I contacted her and found out that she was a librarian, and she encouraged me to go for an interview for a degree in MLS in legal research. I went to that interview and I received a fellowship. And as a result of that, I finished library school in 1982. And in doing that, it just affirmed my sense of self, my sense of what my people have achieved, and it affirmed the need to keep on struggling.
Since this is so important to you, um, as a librarian, how would you keep students to read books, or start to read books, or keep reading books?
So, that's an interesting question. Unfortunately, when we look at what's happening with technology today, oftentimes it's more convenient to go and play with a computer. And a computer has its place. The technology has its place. We watch a considerable amount of television, especially people in our communities.
Yeah.
And television can be very, very dangerous unless you are a discriminating viewer. And we're competing with those kinds of things. So in an effort to try and get young brothers and sisters into reading, I attempt to speak to their interest. If a young person might be interested in, say, joy, I try and make sure that I have books about joy. If a person is interested in how many points, say, Michael Jordan scored in the last NBA championship, I try and have books there that can speak to that interest. If a person is interested in practicing karate, or if a person is interested in learning how to sing or how to dance, irrespective of the interest, if I can get a sense of what that young brother or sister is interested in, I try and have materials in all formats that will speak to that interest, and hopefully I will have books and materials that will speak to their needs, because they need to know, number one, what they contributed or what we contributed to humanity. We were mathematicians. We built the pyramids.
Yeah.
The oldest form of theater in the world is storytelling. And if we can say that the origin of man was on the continent of Africa, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that the oldest form of theater comes out of Africa.
Yeah.
If you look at civilization, Kush, Benin, Timbuktu, the list goes on and on and on, you will see that our history did not begin with us in shackles.
That's true.
It began with us being the architects of humanity. I know I've kind of diverted from your question, but to answer it more specifically, I try and speak to the interest of young people and hopefully their needs.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse me.
Based on their needs, I know a lot of black students need Black Pride. How would you get them to be interested in Black Pride?
I mentioned to you earlier that pride is one of the basic building blocks. A person have some kind of love for oneself.
What would students, like, how would you get students into being interested in Black Pride?
Okay, thank you. History. As I said before, fundamental to Black pride is self-esteem, loving oneself. And in loving oneself, one has to know what one contributed to mankind. One has to know that one is capable and confident. One should know that one has contributed, as I said before, to the language of human experience. So I would approach that by giving young people a knowledge, a breadth of knowledge, but with an emphasis on history. Because in looking at history, if we examine it, we will see the contributions that people of color have made to humanity. So I begin by giving them a sense of history.
Thank you. We want to end this right now, and this is straight to the point, and thank you very much for watching. Bye.
Take the bass line out. Circa. Bounce with it. Yeah. Let it bump though. on his body.